Have you ever heard of a Markian sandwich? Well, today we're going to dive into this really clever literary device because it shows how the author of the Gospel of Mark uses story structure itself to deliver a pretty powerful message. It all really boils down to this super strange moment in Mark chapter 6. So Jesus sends his disciples out on their very first mission. And just as they're getting into the swing of things, the story just slams on the brakes. It cuts away to this really detailed, grisly flashback about the execution of John the Baptist. I mean, why would you put that story right there? It feels so random, but as we're about to see, it is anything but. So here's our game plan for unpacking this. First, we'll talk about what a literary sandwich even is. Then we'll look at that top slice of bread, the disciples' mission. From there, we'll get into the filling, Herod's deadly banquet. And then the bottom slice, Jesus' miraculous feast. And finally, we'll put the whole thing together to see the incredible picture that Mark is painting for us. Okay, let's jump right in. This technique is often called a Markan sandwich, and it's a classic example of what's known as ABA storytelling. The author starts story A, interrupts it with a totally different story B, and then comes back to finish story A. And Mark does this a lot. It's actually one of the keys to unlocking his message. So what is it exactly? Well, the structure is simple, but the effect is really profound. You start story A. Then you deliberately cut away to story B, and finally you circle back to finish story A. Now here's the crucial part. The story in the middle, that's the filling, is put there specifically to help you interpret the stories on the outside, the bread. You're supposed to read them in light of each other. And our passage in Mark chapter 6 is the perfect example of this. Story A begins with Jesus sending the disciples out. Story B, the interruption, is that jarring flashback to John's beheading. And then story A concludes when the disciples return, leading right into the feeding of the 5,000. So let's break down each of these pieces. All right, let's start with our top slice of bread. Jesus commissions the 12 disciples and sends them out on a mission. But the instructions he gives them are, to put it mildly, pretty radical. I mean, think about this. He tells them to take basically nothing. No food, no backpack for supplies, not a single coin. All they get is a staff and the sandals on their feet. Their job is to do what he's been doing. Preach, heal, and cast out demons. But they have to do it all in a state of complete vulnerability, totally relying on the kindness and hospitality of strangers. So, why all these strict rules? Well, this isn't just about traveling light. It's a deeply symbolic act. The whole mission is designed to teach a lesson that real power and real value come from their message and their connection to God, not from money or status or being self-sufficient. It's a mission built on absolute dependence. And just as we're wrapping our heads around this idea of divine dependence, boom, Mark cuts away. We are abruptly thrown into the filling of our sandwich, a dark political flashback to the court of King Herod. Now, this is a huge clue. The fact that this is the only story in the entire gospel where Jesus isn't even present tells us that Mark wants us to sit up and pay very close attention. He's putting a giant spotlight on this scene for a very specific reason. And the story plays out like a political drama. John the Baptist publicly calls out King Herod for his illegal marriage. Herod's wife Herodias is furious and wants John dead, but Herod's a bit conflicted. He kind of fears John's righteousness. It all comes to a head at Herod's big, fancy birthday party. After a suggestive dance from his stepdaughter, he makes a stupid, drunken promise. And, well, pressured by his wife and terrified of looking weak in front of his friends, he orders John's head on a platter. So let's just step inside this banquet for a second. It gives us a snapshot of a totally different kind of kingdom, right? This is a world that runs on status, lust, political games, and a deep fear of what other people think. It's a kingdom built on human power. And what does it produce? The pointless murder of a good man whose head is served up like a party favor. Okay, now for our bottom slice of bread. Mark yanks us out of that dark, smoky palace and brings us right back to the main story. The disciples have just gotten back from their mission, and they find Jesus surrounded by this massive, needy crowd of people. And just look at the contrast and motivation here. Unlike Herod, who was driven by ego and lust, Jesus is moved by compassion. He sees the crowd not as a hassle, but as lost sheep who need a shepherd. And what's his very first response to their need? It's not some flashy miracle. He simply begins to teach them. So the day gets late, and a pretty practical problem comes up. You've got thousands of hungry people in the middle of nowhere. The disciples have a perfectly logical plan.
send everyone home so they can buy food. But Jesus turns to them and gives them this totally impossible command. No, you feed them.
So they take stock of what they have, and all they can scrounge up are 5 loaves of bread and 2 little fish. For a crowd this size, thought is, basically nothing. The task is completely and utterly impossible by any normal standard. And yet, Jesus takes this tiny offering, he gives thanks, and he starts handing it out. And somehow, everyone eats. And remember, that number, 5,000, that probably just counted the men. So the actual number of people fed was likely way, way bigger. But here's the kicker. This isn't just a story about having enough. After every single person is eaten until they're full, the disciples go and collect the leftovers. And there are 12 full baskets left over. This is a story of shocking, over-the-top, miraculous abundance. So now we get to the big question. Why? Why structure the story like this? Why interrupt the mission with that horrible banquet? Why put these 2 very, very different meals, one that ends in death and one that gives life, right next to each other? And this is where the whole structure just pays off brilliantly. Mark is forcing us to compare these 2 banquets. You've got Herod's banquet for the political elites, which is fueled by pride and leads to death. And then you have Jesus' banquet for the common people, which is fueled by compassion and leads to life and abundance. They represent 2 completely opposite ways of being, 2 opposite kingdoms. So let's put our sandwich back together, but this time with the meaning. The top slice shows us a mission that only works through dependence on God. The filling shows us a kingdom that runs on human power and fear, and it just produces death. And the bottom slice reveals God's kingdom, which runs on compassion and produces miraculous life. And this is really the genius of the Markan sandwich. By sticking the story of Herod's corrupt, death-dealing power right in the middle of a story about Jesus' divine, life-giving power, Mark isn't just telling us a couple of stories. He's making an argument. He's forcing the reader to ask a question. Which kingdom do you want to be a part of? The one that takes life, or the one that gives it away in abundance? But there is one last, fascinating little detail here. Unlike with other miracles, Mark never says the crowd was amazed by the feeding. It seems possible that only the disciples, the ones who knew they started with just 5 loaves and 2 fish, really understood the scale of what had just happened. And if that's true, it suggests the lesson about the 2 kingdoms wasn't just for the crowd. It was especially for the disciples, who were just starting their mission. It was a crucial lesson about the kind of power they were now supposed to represent in the world.